Absolutely. And do you think for a lot of those people that it comes up at some point, kind of it comes to a point where, you can't, you might want to explore it, or you might want to acknowledge that and share it with someone who you feel safe with. And it's really hard to keep, that's a way of being in the closet.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a way that a lot of people are in the closet still.
Mhm.
And even like for people who might be married or in committed monogamous relationships, like it's still important to explore your own identity and to understand your own sexual orientation. So yeah,
Yeah.
good luck with
Yeah.
figuring that out. It can be
Yeah.
tricky.
Again, so it's complicated. And just to, again, to go back to that conversation that I had that was really jarring to me, where someone said to me, when I told, so that we were clarifying, how I thought when you first came out that you were basically still going to be,
Hmm.
that you were still going to only be attracted to women, right? I don't even know. I was going to say straight, but it's not straight. It's then lesbian. But anyway, see, all the terms are, none of the terms really work, or nor did they ever. But anyway, when I thought this and was talking to someone about it, and they actually said, well, then why not just stay male? Because like, it makes sense, right? You want to be with women. You could, like, they didn't get, someone didn't get. And I think, I know you're looking quizzically, but I think some people really don't understand this, that your gender identity is who you are. It doesn't matter who you're attracted to. You need to be in
Yeah,
alignment with and living the truth of your gender
yeah,
identity, even if
they are
that's going to
completely
make you a
separate
lesbian
things.
or whatever. Right.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's why things get so conflated. Like we talk about these things in the same conversations, and people who aren't interested in educating themselves about the actual details of what it means to be queer and different queer identities, blur it all together and make these incorrect assumptions about, oh wait, you're trans but you're still straight, so why are you trans? I don't understand.
Right. Right. So have people actually said that to you too?
I mean, that's
No.
basically what the person you were just
That's what the
describing
person said
said.
to me. I can't imagine
Yeah.
that you would be in a circle with someone who would say that to you directly, but I never know. People surprise me all the time. So no one suggested.
I've had people say some pretty interesting things, but not that specifically. No.
Okay. Okay. But so that was, please, if you're listening and you've ever had a thought like that, hopefully this clarifies the difference, and that they're two totally different things, your gender identity and your sexual orientation. So let's get to some of the terminology. I only highlighted a few of the terms. We want this to be informative for people, and I will go alphabetically because I have this alphabetical list of 46 terms. I'll put that article link in the show notes. So we talked about asexual, which is also sometimes referred to as aces. Do you hear that term regularly, or is that? And you can, maybe Jackie, you can help us and
I've
be
heard
like,
the
no,
term
people don't.
ace. I've
Okay,
heard the
people
term ace, but not
ace.
aces, like
Well, they're
not
talking the
plural.
plural. Asexual
Ace.
people are also referred to as aces.
Yeah, yes, I've heard that. Yeah.
Okay, so like, tell me if any of these terms is not in common usage, and you're like, Mom,
I mean,
no,
I'm
don't
not
be
the
saying that.
judge. I'm
No,
not
just
out
from
there in the
your,
world enough to
yes,
know what
people,
who's
we are
saying
not
what.
speaking for everyone, but as someone who's 53, to have access to someone who's 24 and can say,
I
yes,
will give my
yes,
individual perspective
you're
and
in,
mine alone.
that's all we ever do, right, Jackie? And people are still listening and
No, I know.
watching.
I just don't want to make judgments like is that a
No,
term that people use because
but
other
your
people might
take
use
on
it. I
it,
might not use it. Yeah.
your take on it is important. So there's also aromantic, which is defined as a romantic orientation that describes people who experience little or no romantic attraction regardless of sex or gender. So we, really important to distinguish. There's big difference between romantic attraction and sexual attraction, and they may come together and they may not. And so the next term alphabetically is, and we're not going to go through like the whole alphabet, but just a few terms here. Bisexual. So you said you do identify as bisexual. There's also, well, I'll define it, and then I want to compare it to pansexual and see what you think about that. But I think it goes to your point that everybody gets to choose for themselves, right? But based on this definition of bisexual, it seems like it's the same as pansexual. So a sexual orientation that describes people who experience sexual, romantic, or emotional attractions to people of more than one gender. Also referred to as bi, typically includes individuals who are attracted to a variety of people with genders that are similar to and different than their own.
Yep, that is how I experience it.
So you wouldn't identify as pansexual, you feel bisexual is more accurate for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if someone identifies as pansexual, that's what works for them. I identify as
Right.
bisexual. I think there's a lot of nuance that it's up to each person to kind of figure out which term feels right for them. So,
Right. Well, I'll go down to the definition for pansexual since I am kind of asking how we would compare and contrast them. And it says for pansexual, a term that describes individuals who can experience sexual, romantic, or emotional attraction to any person, regardless of that person's gender, sex, or sexuality. So just something to think about. I think it's true. Like everyone gets to figure out what works for them. And everyone also has the right to say, I don't identify with any of these. Don't label me. And I'm hearing more and more people say that as well,
yep,
which I
totally.
think is great. So demisexual, is that a term that you hear often or at all, Jackie? Demisexual?
I can't say I have, but I mean, I'm sure
Okay.
it's a term that people might use. What was the
Yeah,
definition?
I think I've heard it or maybe seen it like on social media, but I wasn't really clear. It says the definition is that it's on the asexual spectrum. This sexual orientation describes individuals who experience sexual attraction only under specific circumstances, such as after building a romantic or emotional relationship with a person. So I think I remember seeing a video where someone described herself as demisexual, and basically the idea was that she's only attracted to her partner sexually, like she's never been attracted to anyone else, and doesn't expect to ever be attracted. But again, to our point earlier, it's all fluid, it could change, but that's how she used
Mhm.
that definition, and
Well, I
she
think that's
did feel it was
interesting
helpful for her.
I think that's interesting because it gets into how you're attracted to people and how you experience attraction versus just who you experience attraction to. So I mean, I guess that sounds like a label where you could be bisexual or lesbian or gay and demisexual, because
Right.
demisexual is maybe speaking. I mean, I'm sure people will tell us in our comments and feedback if we're wrong, but like based on that, it sounds like demisexual is speaking less to who you're attracted to and more to how you experience that attraction.
Yes, like the conditions under specific circumstances, exactly, such as
Yeah.
a romantic or emotional relationship. Yeah, yeah. So just throwing that in there because I have heard it out in the world. And demi-romantic, same thing. This romantic orientation describes individuals who experience romantic attraction only under specific circumstances, such as after building an emotional relationship with a person. So the next one is fluid, and we've been throwing that around, but I want to give you the definition that I found. It says this term refers to the fact that sexuality, sexual attraction, and sexual behavior can change over time. Hear this, parents. Your kid may tell you when they're 12, I'm a lesbian or I'm asexual or anything on this list of 46. And when they're 20 or 30 or 40, it could be something different. It could be nothing of this. It could be something entirely new that we don't even know about yet, right? So it is fluid. So fluid is also used to describe those who experience shifts in their sexuality, sexual attraction, or sexual behavior in different situations throughout the course of their lifetime. You may hear someone describe their sexuality as fluid. Any
Yeah,
thoughts on that, Jackie?
I think sexuality is fluid for maybe not everyone, but a lot of people. And it's, again, just can't stress enough, especially for parents and people who might be struggling to understand these things or struggling to understand what it means to be queer or what it means to be bi or pan or gay or lesbian or any of these things. That it's all fluid and that's okay. And it doesn't invalidate someone's identity just because that hasn't always been how they articulated their identity.
Exactly. Yeah. So since we're on terminology, the next one's gay. I'm not going to read gay because I'm assuming that anybody listening to us knows the definition of gay. But under gay, it notes something I think that's important to say in case anybody listening doesn't know, but I bet most do. The fields of medicine and psychology previously referred to this sexual orientation as homosexual. Homosexual is now viewed as an outdated and offensive term and should not be used to refer to LGBTQ IA, it says here, individuals. Is that true in your experience, Jackie?
Yeah, I don't think I've heard anyone who is actually queer describe themselves or anyone else as a homosexual. I think that is a pretty dated term.
Yeah.
Even transsexual, I've heard more than homosexual. Like homosexual, I don't think I've ever heard anyone
Well, that's
use that
jumping
I
over to
can think of.
gender identity, but I've heard transsexual used too instead of transgender.
I think transsexual is also a somewhat dated term, but is more it's still more frequently in use as opposed to homosexual. I think homosexual has really been pretty thoroughly
I
left
think so
behind.
too. And it has not been reclaimed like the word queer has been.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand the distinction that really it's members of the community who get to define the words that feel empowering and the words that are outdated and offensive.
Yeah, and then there's even a conversation about, and this isn't to call you out or anything, but there's even a conversation about whether people who don't identify as queer should be allowed to use the word queer like as a word that has been reclaimed that has a very ugly history. So I think all those things are very important to acknowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for letting me know that. I'll be mindful of that. And we all need to be. And that brings up also the LGBTQ, because I'm looking at this article and that one section said LGBTQIA. So there's also some, I know, controversy or discussion about whether the IA is part of the acronym, which would stand for intersex and asexual. And we already discussed asexual. And intersex is where people are born with some variation where they're not assigned completely male or female at birth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't really have a take on whether intersection asexual should or shouldn't be in the acronym, because I feel like that's I feel like I would rather leave it up to, I haven't done a lot of research, to be honest, on like the intersex and asexual communities and whether they want to be part of the acronym or whether there's like, I don't know if there's a uniform desire in those communities to be part of the acronym. If there is and they want to be part of the acronym, that's great. I'm not trying to gatekeep the acronym, but I also just don't want to like add on other communities that I can't speak for necessarily or don't know if they want to be part of the acronym. So but I think the acronym is it's an evolving thing. You know, the Q was not always part of the acronym. Like it was LGBT, and there's a lot of LGB was much more popular, or like GLBT, or there's all different variations of the acronym that have existed for a long time already.
Yeah, exactly. So people get to choose. So I think people will use the acronym that they feel is accurate and inclusive and respectful as much as possible. So just to clarify, intersex is an umbrella term that describes bodies that fall outside the strict male-female binary. And there are lots of ways that someone can be intersex. And, you know, we won't go into all of the issues, but there's a lot of concern over intersex babies and their parents deciding to have them undergo surgery as a baby that forces them into male or female bodies. And some of those folks end up being transgender because they were forced by their parents and the doctors into a particular body. And many people would argue that the individual should get to choose when they feel they're clear on their gender identity. So there's a whole conversation around that happening as well.
Yeah, I actually think it's important to acknowledge that I'm pulling up an article so I can accurately reference it, but I think it's important to acknowledge that my state senator, Scott Wiener, has been trying for 3 years to ban some types of surgeries, basically the ones you're describing, on young children born with intersex characteristics. So these are irreversible surgeries that are often performed on infants. I mean, it's really insane to me that in a state like California, where we try to be better than these things, that we're still doing this, and that Senator Wiener has been trying for 3 years to do this, and the bill has been unable to get out of committee because the California Medical Association, which again, California Medical Association, that is the statewide association of doctors. So let's do better, doctors. Let's change that. Let's stop killing this bill to prevent irreversible surgeries on minors. Let's have the courage to admit that you were wrong on this and that you've been doing a lot of harm with these surgeries. And let's stop trying to kill this bill, because I think the California Medical Association should be really ashamed of themselves for killing this bill over and over again. And I think any political candidate who is accepting the endorsement of the California Medical Association should be really ashamed of themselves, because that's basically telling me that you don't support intersex kids.
Absolutely. I'm 100% in agreement. And I've actually read some articles and saw one TED Talk in particular. I'll also put the link to that in the show notes, by an intersex person who talked about the horrors of having been made to have the surgery, and what a mistake that was, and and also the violation of all the doctors over all the years, being so invasive with their body, because seeing them as kind of, like not even a person, because because they're intersex, and if it was like something that had to be medically fixed in ways that others would define and determine. And it was just heartbreaking to hear this story. So please be informed about that as well. And when you see the LGBTQIA, should you see that out there, know that that's what the I stands for.
And if you're interested in taking a little action to try to support this, and I mean, ask your primary care. You have presumably a lot of people who are listening have primary care physicians and have relationships with their primary care physicians. So next time you meet with your primary care physician, ask them if they're a member of the California Medical Association. And if they are a member of the California Medical Association, ask them whether they will commit to lobbying the association to changing their stance on Senator Wiener's intersex bill, because you're their customer. So they should want to do you solid on that one.
Absolutely. Yep. And I will make a note to make sure.
I know. I'm like, ooh, I gotta.
No, that's great. It's
that.
important. And that TED Talk that I'm going to put in the show notes is something you can share, because it's actually hearing from someone who is intersex and who shares the trauma that was inflicted over a lifetime because of that fact, and that even some involved now regret it and see the error of their ways. So this is a really important issue that we need to be active on and be informed about. Absolutely. Now, being intersex has no connection to sexual orientation, right?
Yes, but we've gone a little bit off, but it's an important topic.
It's okay, because it's an important topic, and this acronym is putting everybody together, right? Because there may be some,
and that's the question. It's like,
right?
Do we to what extent do we want to lump different experiences, like being trans, which is a very different experience from not being straight, into this, or being intersex or being asexual? To what extent do we want to lump experiences into a community? I think it's always going to be a trade-off, because the more communities you can bring together, the more the larger a coalition you can build, and the more power you can build. But at the same time, the more diffused that experience gets, and the less shared experience you have, and the more you're speaking for people with very different experiences. So I think that's all very subjective and all very fluid, and I'm sure the acronym will continue to change over the years.
Exactly. So however it changes, and however we see it out there, we want to honor whatever each individual identifies for themselves, as Jackie said at the beginning. So I think that's the clear answer when it's like, well, should I use this or should I use that? First of all, it's not really the place of someone who's heterosexual and cisgender to be choosing any of those things, but just to be noticing and honoring and respecting what people in the community are articulating as far as how they identify and what labels they want to use or don't want to use, and how. Now, another term on the list is passing. And this is the term that's used a lot. And some people actually feel the term itself is now derogatory and problematic, right? So let me just define and then get your take on it. Passing refers to society's perceptions and assumptions of someone's sexuality or gender. This term is commonly used to discuss the frequency and extent to which an LGBTQIA person is perceived or assumed to be straight or cisgender. So this is something that does apply to anyone identifying in that acronym, whether you are seen as passing or not. It's important to note that some LGBTQIA plus people have the desire to pass, while others do not. In fact, the act of being perceived as straight or cisgender can be a source of discomfort and discrimination for some in the LGBTQIA community. What do you think about that, Jackie?
Yeah, I think that it's important to acknowledge that this is a very complex issue. And I think that right off the bat, the one thing that I as an individual have to acknowledge is most important in my opinion is that passing is a privilege, and that um
Mhm.
as much as it may make a queer person uncomfortable to not be perceived as queer, there's also a lot of queer people who are scared to be perceived as queer and who are in fear of their safety because they
Mhm.
are perceived as queer. And so, like you said, even in San Francisco, like even in the most accepting places, there's always going to be hateful people who, if they perceive you as queer, they're going to want to do some kind of harm to you. And that is a threat that people who are visibly queer who don't pass are always going to face. And I get that. I mean, I deal with that on a regular basis. And it, like I said, again, it's part of the reason why I live in San Francisco. Um, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. And it's also important to acknowledge that it might be really strange to be part of this community and then all of a sudden pass and feel like you're alienated from part of the community or people who don't pass. And I don't think that people who don't pass should alienate people who pass. But I do think that it's important to acknowledge the inherent privilege that comes with passing, whether it's
Yeah.
passing as straight or passing as cis, in whatever way.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. Tons of privilege. And just, I think also important to note being careful, especially for cisgender and heterosexual people, not to assume that people want to pass. I know that's something that, or that's really important to them, or that they should try to. I know for parents of transgender kids, or even of kids who may identify as other than heterosexual, their parents may put pressure on them to pass and to hide their true identity because of the parents' discomfort with reactions out in the world, or the parents' fears, as you spoke to, Jackie, of violence. But it's that individual's choice, right? Or it may not even be their choice. It may just be however they feel and their reaction to the idea of passing or not passing. It's not up to anyone else to like put their emotional reaction or their needs or their fears onto the LGBTQ person.
Yep, I
Yes.
completely agree. And I think that's probably a good note to end on. Because
Okay.
I do have to
Yeah.
run to the
Yes.
store to get
Yes.
that
The
package
time just
before
flies when
they
we're having.
close at 5. Because
Okay. We got most of the definitions. Actually, we got all the definitions I had that I was going to go through. I wasn't going to go through all 46. So I appreciate the conversation. I think there's a lot more to it, but hopefully for our listeners and our viewers, we clarified the overall complexity and fluidity, and encourage you to study this a lot more, not to make any assumptions, be very careful in conversations. Um, and just respect each person's identity, whatever it may be. And if they choose not to use any of these labels to identify, respect that as well, and be comfortable, learn to be comfortable with and appreciative of the diversity and complexity of our sexual identities as well as our gender identities.
yep, and thanks so much for listening, everyone. I think this was an important topic to address, and I hope that this was helpful.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.